So, we really want to focus in on what you're asking your sales team to do. And I would emphasize that there's really 2.5 of those things that you want your sales team really to be spending their time on, and that is calling on new prospects, meeting with prospects, and then meeting with customers, because those are the things that are really going to be generating sales and generating new revenue. All right, so as we kind of look at those activities, it's always helpful to know that I'm just not making these things up. So there's actually some pretty reliable research out there on this. There's a company called Pace Productivity out of Toronto, Canada, that actually evaluates and looks at what the sales team is spending their time on. And if you look at the pie chart in front of you, you can see the one category that we really want to focus on, which is this 22% selling. That's the amount of time salespeople are actually spending working with clients and on revenue-generating activities. So clearly you can see there's room for productivity, and when you're starting to think about your sales team, what you want to think about is, if my sales team is only spending 22% of their time on sales, that means, if I have 5 salespeople, I'm really just wasting one of them, because the amount of time on average for one of those people is not being used on sales-related activities. So what can you do about this, and why do you need to care? So why do you need to care about this? Well, the first thing is salespeople are expensive. A good salesperson, they're worth their weight in gold, but they're also hard to come by. So if you have a very good salesperson, you want to make sure you keep them engaged on what they really want to be doing, which is selling to customers. They don't want to typically be writing and producing emails and the other administrative tasks that go along with selling. And they're really, really hard to find. And the other thing that you have to realize is that if you have a good salesperson, other people want those salespeople, and there's always companies out there looking for people that are aggressive, well-trained salespeople. So in order for you to really maintain your sales force and keep them engaged, you want to make sure that you're constantly giving the tools that your sales team, giving your salespeople the tools that they need to be productive, and keep them engaged on what they really want to do. And really, the other piece of this is, if your sales team is only spending that 22% of their time on selling, the rest of their time is not spent on revenue generation, which is really, counterproductive to what you want your sales team doing. So how do you keep your sales team productive? So there's lots of things that, can be beneficial there. The first thing is really you want to define your solution or offer. One of when we work with smaller companies and new sales forces, one of the things that we always identify when we talk to those clients is that they let their salespeople go and identify their customers that they're targeting, and they're going after the money. You've heard that probably a couple of different times in different scenarios, but you have, companies that, get really derailed by going after the money because there's an opportunity to sell something that maybe isn't in their sweet spot, if you will, and your salesperson sees an opportunity and goes ahead and goes after it. So you really want to define your solution and your offer to make it very clear about here's the type of customer that we want, and here's what we want to be selling them to, because that's where we're going to be most profitable. Once you kind of define that offer, then you go to that next step of really profiling and understanding your marketplace. This is really one of the most important steps you can do for your sales team, which is really identifying, we want to sell into the healthcare field, or we want to sell into retail, we want to sell into services organizations. You really want to identify where you have the best opportunity to generate leads and sales, and you really want to focus your sales team on that. So once you have that understanding, you can say, all right, sales team, here's where I want you to go. I want you to go after this type of customer. The next thing you can do is
clarify, Ken,
if I call it that, is
Ken, these are things that your sales team are not doing. These are things for the management and sales leadership team versus the salespeople, correct?
Right. These are things that you should do really even before you start building out your sales force, because until you can understand these items, your sales team is going to kind of be running out wild, and you're not really sure you're going to get some activity, but they're not really going to be the most productive sales team. And you might find that if you really keep them engaged, you might be able to have less salespeople closing more deals than if you were just kind of hired a bunch of people and let them go find out what they were trying to sell.
Got it.
So the next thing on that list is really some of your communication things. One of the things that it always strikes me as a little bit funny, and it's pretty standard across organizations, is that you really want to develop some templates and sales toolkits for your sales team to use in their communication with customers. So, and that can be anything from presentations to standard proposals to introductory emails, and it goes along with like literature and all your sales tools. But some of those tools that really help them get in the door or keep the conversation going. There's nothing that's more effective to a salesperson than really saying, here's a great message that you can send out to your customer that will start a conversation. And that's what you're trying to do as a management team or a sales support team, is really help your sales team start a conversation with people that are going to be interested in the product and ultimately turn into sales. So if you can give them those tools up front and really write them for them, that really will jumpstart your sales programs and help you keep them engaged. And I've talked to many salespeople, and they don't really enjoy doing presentations, or they don't always enjoy writing. That's not why they got into sales. They got into sales because they want to talk to people and they enjoy that negotiation and competitive nature of the sales process. Creating a presentation, particularly if you have a group of sales team or 5 or 6 different salespeople, you want one person that's really good at that activity creating the presentation so that you don't have the same activity happening across multiple salespeople. So you really want to be efficient with your time. And then the final thing you really want to do, particularly for an established sales team, is really better qualify the leads you're giving to your sales team. And this goes back to what I said earlier about defining your solution and profiling and understanding your marketplace. If you can do those two things really, really well, you can identify what your lead criteria are, and you can get people into your sales funnel that are much farther along in that process, so that your sales team is doing more of the negotiation and setup of the final closing of that sale, which is really where you want them to spend their time. So that was quite a bit of things that you can do from trying to keep your sales team focused. So really, how do you do that is evaluating and defining your sales processes. If you don't have, like Eric's question was, if you don't have a good sales process, hiring more salespeople isn't going to do you that much more or generate that much more revenue. It's going to put more people on the street, and they're going to find deals. But if you really want to be profitable, you have to develop a very strong and solid sales process to understand at what point do I want to engage a salesperson, or at what point do I need to have a support team working those deals in order to keep them active on closing. And what I went a little fast there. So really, if you look at your sales process, you have these people up in the cloud at the top. And those are really unknown prospects. You think that they fit the right target market and the right profile, but you really want to give some education process to them and turn them into leads and then ultimate prospects. But where you want your salespeople to really get engaged is when you've identified there's an opportunity here for a sale. I need a salesperson to really take that from, yeah, they have a need and an interest, to they're working with us. So that's really where you want to say that. And the arrow pointing up is the marketing team there. And when I say marketing, I'm really referring to a sales support organization, someone that's able to really focus on the needs of the sales team, but it's a sales support organization. It could be inside sales, it could be marketing. There's lots of different names for that group, and on this slide we're just calling them marketing. So the number one question I always get when I show this slide is, how would I pay for something like that? So when you think about your sales team and you talk about what we've kind of already outlined with where they're spending their time, if we're giving you the benefit of the doubt and saying that your sales team is spending, a single salesperson is spending 40% of their time off task, which means that 60% of their time they're actually engaged with prospects and customers that have the propensity to turn into a sale. So that leaves 40% of their time doing other tasks. And if you think about the typical salesperson salary, if you look at, they're making $100,000, and that might be base plus incentives, if they're making $100,000 and 40% of their time is spent on non-sales related activity, that gives you a $40,000 budget for those activities that you're spent on non-direct sales related costs. Now, let's put in more salespeople there. So now you take that $40,000 and multiply it by 2 salespeople, and that's $80,000 a year that you're going to be spending on non-sales related activities. And when you start looking at those numbers, and if you start adding more salespeople, you start thinking about how can I keep them more engaged on sales and being more productive with those activities? Because as we know about typical salespeople, if they're each creating a presentation and you have 5 salespeople, we shouldn't have to reinvent that wheel each time. If you give them a tool, they won't have to spend their time doing that piece, and you can be much more productive with that time.
Hey, Ken.
Yep.
And I think from experience, 40% off task in sales is, I would say, even being generous. And this is not goofing off time. This is time that you're not spent engaged with a prospect who you think is going to become a customer. Correct?
Correct. So, this is anything from looking through websites to find out what does this company do, to toiling through databases, to simply you call in and find the name of the right person. So there's some of those things can be sales activities, but to be really effective, you want your salespeople on the phone talking to people that have already expressed interest, and that's where we want to keep the sales team engaged.
And the key to that is to take and offload all of the things out of the sales process that the salespeople don't necessarily need to handle, and you can get someone else to handle it.
Right. So really the key there is, if you're paying a salesperson $100,000 to look through a database and make cold calls, is that the most effective, or can you, source that to someone that, gets paid $50,000 and can do that job because it's their sole focus? They won't get distracted with other things. That's really the #1 area of efficiency that we can help with sales teams, is really enabling them to be much more focused on the selling aspect as opposed to the finding aspect.
Got it.
And that really gets to understanding your team's strengths. So there's individuals that are clearly salespeople. You meet them all the time, and that person's a salesperson and they're really, really good at it. And then you'll find other people that, they're a marketing person, they're a database person, they're an analyst. And they have a mentality and a skill set that allows them to really be successful at that. So you want to look at your team and know your strengths. The little picture of the dentist up here, I don't want to do my own dental work. So I go and I find the person that's an expert at that. The same thing can be said for the activities within your sales cycle. And you have to kind of evaluate that sales cycle. As I said earlier, if you have a good process, then you can evaluate who's responsible for each step in that process. And that's really what you want to do. And it gets back again to this kind of chart of different things that you can do for your sales organization to support them and make them much more effective. And then when you assign them to tasks, you look at purchasing and building lists. And if you think about what that really does for you or for your sales team, it gives them a place to start calling into or start targeting. And that can be much more effectively managed by a sales team or an inside sales team. So if you think about kind of the structure of your sales organization, if you have 2 inside salespeople for every salesperson to keep them really engaged and active, that can be an effective relationship, because you can generally pay 2 inside salespeople the same as 1 outside salesperson. That if you can keep that outside salesperson then really, really actively engaged, you can really be much more effective in how you do things.
And the key there, Ken, is what you're keeping them actively engaged in, and that's the sales process, not everything else behind it. Right.
So really, if you spend, some of the more difficult things you can do for a sales team is really building those lists and staying in front of people that, a salesperson doesn't really enjoy calling to someone that isn't in the sales process right now. But, it takes some, warm touch and some little nurturing to go on there to, take someone from January where they said, I'm not really interested right now. I might be interested in, 6 months to a year. That's not someone you want your salesperson actively talking to on a regular basis. But you do want to stay in front of that person. So, identifying that target is important, but passing them off to the sales person when they're ready to make a purchase is really the key. So, steps 1 through 4 here, where you're getting up to identifying the need and then qualifying the opportunity, all of those things can be handled by a sales support organization or a marketing organization. And then once they get qualified, that's when you really want your sales team to get engaged.
Got it.
So other processes for the sales, to support your sales team. One of the more important ones is really lead tracking and qualification. So knowing where, when you did your market profile and you identified here's what we need to be selling, that gave you kind of a baseline. The next thing you want to do is really track the leads and the qualification criteria based on that to understand where you're successful and are you accurate in who you're profiling and who you're targeting. So lead tracking and qualification is really important to that. It'll help you be more effective in what leads you give to your sales team later on, which is really an important criteria. But then also market development programs, things to really get your name out there so that when either your inside salesperson, even if you don't have that inside salesperson and your sales team is doing that for themselves, how do they get recognized in the marketplace? And I'm not saying you need to go out and do advertising, but making sure that your website is well constructed so that when people say, I'm calling from Response Point, the first thing people do is, they go to Google and say, who am I talking to? And they'll pull up that website and say, all right, do I want to spend any time with this, or do I want to give this person any time at all? So that structure and the awareness that you have in the marketplace so that your team is getting warm reception from the prospects that they're talking to, which is really, really important. The next thing you can do is really events and educational sessions. So this webinar is something that works in that venue, so you're educating your prospects and staying in front of them so that when your prospects do finally say, I need to solve this problem, they're already educated first on, what is it that you do and also how you could help them. But then they're also educated on, who do I need to talk to? And that's an organization that I remember. They prove themselves through these educational forums and events as experts. But events are another great opportunity for you to get in front of multiple customers at the same time. And this is, if you think about those people that said, you talked to them in January and they said, I'm interested in buying, I'm just not going to do it for 6 months to a year. You still want to create some face time with those organizations if you can. You just want to do it in a very efficient manner. So, things that we've done with clients on a smaller scale. So for smaller companies, you can do some social type things. So like the Final Four is coming up, and you can do, a Final Four launch party or something, and have, the opportunity for prospects and just invite them to come over to watch the event with you, either at your location or at a neutral site like a bar or something where you're paying for the appetizers and they're paying for their drinks because you don't want that liability. But it gives you a great way for your salespeople to interact with people in a familiar non-sales activity, and it gives them the ability to build a relationship and maybe do some convincing that maybe they should accelerate that purchasing decision. We've also done things like lunch and learns for companies that have a very large audience in specific areas. You might go to a specific facility and say, hey, we're going to do a lunch and learn where you can come and learn about these solutions, or you can come see some demos, or we're doing something that kind of educates that prospect on what the solution is and how it would work for them in a very non-threatening way. When people get into groups, it's that group mentality. You can do anything, and it's a lot less threatening if you're there with a group or you're there in a setting that is a little more familiar to you, and that's really important.
Hey, Ken, and it bears pointing out, and I think there needs to be a really clear delineation between the nurturing and the sales process, because I don't think I, like most people, don't appreciate showing up to something that, hey, it's a lunch and learn, and then, all of a sudden get pounced on by a salesperson. So keeping those two things clear and some integrity in that process is really important. That
is a really great point, because turning off the sales cycle is something that you have to be very careful of. A pushy salesperson can turn off a prospect very quickly. If you go, the old car dealer mentality is, if someone comes out and they're like, you need to buy this one, this is it, this is it, this is it, and you haven't done your due diligence to really understand that customer's problems or their needs, there's no way you can have any credibility. So you have to be very cognizant of where you are in the sales cycle with that client. And then the nurturing aspect of that campaign is really important too. So the nurturing is really, I like to call it more of an educational process. It's, you're talking to the person, you're staying in front of them, but you're sharing information with them in a way that educates them both on how they can solve their problem, why they should work with you, and why that waiting is an issue, or why waiting is going to cost them more money. And you have to do that in a very non-threatening way, which is very difficult to do. And it's not something that I would send out salespeople to do, because salespeople are meant to close and get active deals. They're looking at, how do I turn this into revenue? Whereas the nurturing process is much more subtle and much more in tune with meeting the needs of the client or the prospect to answer their questions.
So Ken, and that's another good point. You want a clear separation between marketing and sales to ensure that happens properly, and that you're not trying to push somebody along to get a deal closed or get a car sold in your example and end up ruining it for good, when all they really want to do is maybe get a brochure that day and check out some things.
Correct. Definitely.
In addition to the efficiency issues that you mentioned before, and that you don't want the sales staff involved in that.
Right. So if I'm paying someone, $100,000 to, basically say, hello, do you need a brochure? That's not really an effective use of their time. So there's other ways of doing those things that are much more efficient and much more effective uses of time and money. So the other thing, again, as I started this presentation, one of the things I said, it's always good to have validation for what we're saying from sources that really focus on that are other than me and my experience with clients. So, sales tracking, and, I mentioned that this was really, really important. And the other piece of sales tracking is that, if you pass a lead off to your sales team today and, they come back to you and say, yeah, that guy was never ready, that guy wasn't ready, that's a perfectly valid response to that lead. But what you want to make sure is that you don't lose track of that lead, because, at some point they did something to identify themselves as being a viable prospect. So you want to stay in front of them through that process of nurturing and staying with that customer, because according to Sears Decisions, which is an organization out of Connecticut that actually focuses almost exclusively on the sales and this inside sales relationship, they're looking at 80% of prospects deemed bad by sales actually go on to buy within 24 months. And if you look at some of your longer-term sales cycles where you have to get in at a specific contract date, or you have to wait for another relationship to expire, that can be a 9-month sales cycle, no problem. So you really have to be cognizant of what the sales tracking tool is that you're using, or how you're managing those sales processes. And then closely related to that is, lead nurturing is, really important, because, if the sales team says this lead isn't ready right now and they're going to go on to buy within 24 months, you really want to implement a lead nurturing program, because that's how you're going to stay in front of that client and know that they're not ready today, but they are going to be in 9 months. I want to make sure I'm still on their radar and that I'm still in tune with when they're going to do that. And Forrester Research, which is another organization, they're in Boston, which is clearly the headquarters for research right now, I think. Companies that truly excel at lead nurturing generate 50% more sales-ready leads at 33% lower cost, which is a huge deal. So you're getting more leads and at lower cost. And the reason that you can get it at lower cost is because you're not paying the $100,000 salespeople to find those leads. You're paying the $50,000 person to really focus on finding leads and passing them off to the salesperson. So those two processes together really generate more leads at lower cost, which is really what we're trying to get at. So then I just want to thank everybody, and I think we have a few questions out there, but again, I wanted to put my contact information on the page. If you do want to get a hold of me, you can email me or call me directly, or you can link up with me on LinkedIn and ask questions that way as well. Questions, Eric? I think you have some. If they're out there.
Yeah, Ken. I'm kind of going through things here, and Trying to get a couple of organized. Here's a good one. So the first one is you mentioned some tactics around nurturing, lead nurturing. I mean, can you give like maybe the top one or top two that you see as most effective?
Sure. Oops, sorry, I was going slides. So tactics for lead nurturing are really, there's a couple of things that you really have to do. The first one is really that educational process. So I always talk about lead nurturing as a process that is related to kind of a customer service scenario. So if you think about really good customer service, you're providing information, you're providing services, and you're doing it in a very non-threatening way. And that's really what the key to a lead nurturing program is. You have to provide information. You also have to capture information from the person that you're talking to. So you always want to be profiling and trying to find out what are their pain points and what are they doing so that you can identify, all right, this person is definitely interested in what we're doing, but they're not quite ready for the sales team yet. So that's really the keys to a really good lead nurturing program.
So that leads into another question here. So you made the point, and for me, kind of the key takeaway here is, get sales sites focused on sales and get the marketing stuff out of their way and get somebody focused on that, and don't let the two cross. But do you have some pointers on criteria to on a lead-by-lead basis, help decide when to put a lead in the sales bucket or when to put them back into nurturing, or vice versa?
Sure. So the number one criteria really is buying time frame. I mean, clearly, if someone has indicated that I'm looking for, I'm looking to make a purchase now, clearly those items go over to the sales team, and that's easy to say, and any company can identify that. The key is, how do you determine what the buying time frame is for an organization? So there are certain triggers that you can look at and every client is going to have some slightly different triggers. But if you're thinking about your sales cycle, and again, it gets back to what I said earlier, if you have to really define your sales cycle, you can start identifying points in that sales cycle where you'll have key indicators, and things like looking for a demo of the solution, or when they start looking at specific features and functions or benefits to your solution. So for a software company, it's clearly, I'm looking for a demonstration where I'm getting really into kind of the weeds of how does this solution work or how is it going to be implemented. For a services organization, it might be, what is your response rates? What are, how quickly can you get out to my organization to fix something if it's broken, or how long will the implementation process be? For, a construction company, it might be something along the lines of, what's the project timeline? How long will it take from, when I say, yeah, you're the one I want to work with, to, now your team is out of here and everything on my site is clean. So you have to look at all of those different process steps in your sales process to identify, when someone asks this question, they're typically at a stage where they're within a month or 2 months of actually making a purchase. And every organization is going to be a little different. But you can clearly, when you start looking at that process, identify, this is the indicator that I'm looking at. And that's not to say that everyone should get passed off. It's that you want to make sure your profile is complete of that person before you pass it off, so that your sales team doesn't have to do that. And those are the indicators to tell you, I need to spend more time with this prospect to get them sales ready.
Yeah, and the flip side of that is a really hard thing to do too, for a salesperson to really understand where they are at with a particular prospect and decide, maybe they're not ready. I really need to move this back into nurture, before you blow it up, right?
Right. So, you should try to make it as easy as possible for your sales team to say, this lead isn't ready for me. That's something that organizations really struggle with, and it's clearly a difficult thing, because what you'll find is, your sales team will say, that's not ready for me, and they'll try to only work their own leads. There's two things that really kind of lead to that situation is, if you're passing off leads that aren't really sales ready, they're going to start turning everything back to you. What you want to do is you want to start giving your sales team leads that are really well qualified, so that they're demanding those leads from you. So the better qualified the lead is, the less often they're actually going to push it back to you. But you want to make it really easy for them to do that, because you don't want them spending their time talking to people that are going to take 3 months to really get into the buying cycle. There's people that are better qualified for that. And one of the areas where I see this as really happening, and where you don't want the salesperson to own it, is when the prospect that they might be actually asking the right questions, they might ask the right buying behavior questions, but they're not well enough educated about the solution. So that's an indication where I passed it off to sales, and the salesperson said, this person, they might be qualified, but they still need a lot of help in understanding what our solution does or how we're going to solve their problems. And that training, if you will, is better done by a sales support organization, where we can provide them with white papers and other resources that can educate that customer. And it might be a very short return to the sales process, the sales support process. It might be a month where someone's actually giving them information and really feeding them with all of the things they need to know about the sales, what our solution is, before sales really does get engaged. And sales might still be involved at that point, but it's actually being managed by someone else at that stage.
Gotcha. So there are a couple of questions here. So the first one I'm going to take a crack at, because I think I know the answer to this based on kind of what you've taught me in my experience, and it's this. How does this process relate to smaller companies where you don't really have a dedicated sales staff or dedicated marketing staff, when you've got one person that kind of wears multiple hats? And my answer to that would be, being really adamant about doing time blocking. And even if you're doing multiple roles, set aside specific time blocks to do specific roles. So take it back several years ago when we first started getting focused on sales. I would block out specific time to do inside sales, specific time to do outside sales, and make sure that I was filling those buckets. Initially 100% inside, then 80% inside, 20% outside. Then now it's time to bring on somebody who can just help with inside. So it kind of evolves that way, but I think for me the key was blocking out those specific chunks of time versus just sitting down and trying to figure out what to do next. Would you agree?
Yeah, so definitely. So when I talk to clients, we call it the squirrel scenario of, you're running down the street with a dog, and the dog sees a squirrel over there, and it's immediately going in that direction. So blocking out the times really is the key in saying, every morning I'm going to spend 2 hours doing this activity, and you have that, and say you have to block out everything else so you don't get distracted with the bright colors and shiny objects in the other areas.
Yeah, got it. So here's a good one. Let's see here. Does this concept work for selling services? And the specific question was cold calling into the medical field. Any pointers on that? And I know how tough that can be.
Yeah. So the medical field is really one that's very difficult. Clearly, doctors' times, if you're calling into physicians, is really difficult. You'll never get really a doctor on the phone directly. But from a services standpoint, I mean, it's all about getting in the door and really getting that relationship built is the key there. And it's the relationship for your company first, and then the salesperson second. And that's something that is a little bit more difficult for our salespeople to grab hold of, because their livelihood is their network and their relationships with everybody. And if they're going to jump companies and go somewhere else, it's their relationship. So building that relationship with your organization is something that can be done. And for the healthcare industry, there's a company that's courting us, and it's just like when you're dating. You don't jump right into the sales. You jump right into, hey, first date, let's get married. It's first date, here's who I am, here's a little bit about me, and you're trying to show your best side, and you want to represent that with who you are as a company. And then once you get a little bit further along, then you make the salesperson is the face of your company and bring them in the door as well. Services organizations really do have a slightly different challenge, simply from a standpoint of services are provided, and particularly in small services organizations where services are provided by an individual, and they may know the owner of the company, or they may know John at this company, and he's the one that always does my work. And if they call in and they get Kathy, they may be like, whoa, what's going on? I got someone that's not familiar with my business. I don't know if I like this. So it does provide a little bit more of a challenge and something that you have to really be cognizant of and try to stress, building the relationship around your organization and how effective you are as an organization.
Yeah, agreed. So we just a couple more minutes here, and I still want to wrap up and talk about our next webinar that's coming up. But the next question, one of my favorites, one that I'm sure you hear a lot: databases. Where do I find good lists? How do I integrate those with CRM? Any pointers on that?
Sure. So the best databases are ones you really build on your own. It's a terrible thing to say because, everyone, if you have an email address, you're getting emails that say, hey, would you like to buy this list of everybody in this industry or everybody that has this tool? But really, we spend a lot of time working with databases, and there are good places to get databases and bad places to get databases. And just for reference, magazines are a really great place to get a database because they're validating their membership on a regular basis. Organizations are another great, because people join those organizations because they're interested in a topic that's related to those organizations. But even with the best list, you're going to have to spend some really quality time identifying as you go through that list, who are the people on this list that are really, prospects for me and, people I should be talking to. And that's a very time-consuming process that, a marketing or sales support organization needs to do. But, and the integration to your CRM. So something, your database tool that you use, it doesn't have to be elaborate. You can use spreadsheets. You can use, Access. You can use, a Goldmine or Act. There's lots of tools out there. The key is being very dedicated to using that database and making sure you're putting as much information into that database and keeping it up to date as possible. Every time you talk to a customer, you want to make sure you keep a notes on that, but you also want to make this as easy as possible, because if it's a time-consuming and elaborate process to keep track of that data, you're not going to do it. So spreadsheets work really, really well for smaller companies where there's a smaller sales force. When you start getting into a larger sales force, Salesforce.com is great. It allows you to really track some data, and it allows you to put leads in there and tasks for other people, which is nice. But when
one important thing that we learned kind of early on is even if you get to the point and you decide that a lead is not good for you, don't take them out. Just flag them as such, because then that makes additional data downloads and deduplication a lot easier.
That is a really great point. So something that companies don't think about, and when people work with their database, they're like, I really want clean data, so I'm going to, if someone's disqualified, they're going to take them out of the database, which is a huge mistake. Because what you'll find is if you delete someone from your database, a year from now, you're going to be talking to that same person again. So you really want to keep your database, as robust as possible and identify everyone. And even if you eliminate someone, you want to keep them in the database so that, maybe they change something and the elimination criteria that you had, is overcome because they did something. Or, you're going to have customers that call you every 3 months and saying, hey, I need this. Can you do that for me? And you're going to give them a bid, and they're not going to do anything with it. And you're going to want to avoid them in the future.
Yeah, good point. Well, listen, thanks again, Ken. I really appreciate you taking the time to share your knowledge and your experience with us. You've got your contact information there. I encourage anybody that has further questions or wants to learn more about what Ken and Response Point do, reach out to him. They're an awesome resource right here in Cary. Anything you want to add, Ken?
No, I just want to thank everybody for their time. It's been a pleasure, and I wish you the best of luck.
Awesome. So just real quick, our next webinar is going to be April the 24th. And this is going to be, it's going to be March the 27th. I apologize. This is going to be on tenant representation. So 10 ways a good tenant rep can increase your business profitability. My good friend Bo from Rich Commercial Realty is going to do this. It's a great topic and one that we just went through because Rich helped us find our current space and did an awesome job. So hopefully he can share some things with you too as well. So listen, thanks all of you for joining us, and make it a great day.